All right, so the title of my message today is Stop Criticizing. Ooh. So we're continuing our Sermon on the Mount series, and today we'll be unpacking Matthew 7, where it talks about judging others. All right, so I'll just read it. So verses 1 to 5, it says, "Don't judge so that you won't be judged. You'll receive the same judgment you give. Whatever you deal out will be dealt out to you. Why do you see the splinter that's in your brother's or sister's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your brother or sister, 'Let me take the splinter out of your eye,' when there's a log in your eye? You deceive yourself. First, take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's or sister's eye." So, the topic is about judgment. It is a juicy topic. But before we jump right in, I want to take some time to explain the different kinds of judgment there are, and which one Jesus is focusing here in Sermon on the Mount. So the first I can think of is legal judgment. So we go to court, look for a judge, and to look at all the evidence, and then pass judgment on whether a person has broken the law or not. A second one that some of us might think is similar to this is work or school appraisals. Our teachers assess our overall performance, our behavior in school, how well we do for all subjects, and we get a comment on whether we were good or bad, lazy or hardworking. And the same thing also happens every 6 months at work, except now it's KPIs and bosses assessing us. Then we have interpersonal judgment, which we all do. Depending on our personal values or what we think is important, we decide if we like someone or not. Sometimes we also judge people over superficial things, how they look, how they behave, and we are quick to form either a positive or negative impression. So how many of you think having good interpersonal judgment is important? So that we know who to trust and who not to trust, who to be friends with and who to avoid. And I think that's really important. In fact, the Bible teaches us over and over to be people with good judgment about people, about situations. The Bible also says one of the essential qualities of being a leader in life is having good judgment when it comes to leading and mentoring. So why does Jesus say here in Sermon on the Mount, do not judge? Well, because he is referring to a very negative kind of judgment that has to do with being critical. So this is how the Message Bible translates the same passage. Don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. That critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. It's easy to see a smudge on your neighbor's face and be oblivious to the ugly sneer on your own. Do you have the nerve to say, "Let me wash your face for you," when your own face is distorted by contempt? Is this whole traveling roadshow mentality all over again, playing a holier-than-thou part instead of just living your part? Wipe that ugly sneer off your own face, and you might be fit to offer a washcloth to your neighbor. Wow, that really hits me really hard. So, do you know where Jesus is going with this now? You see, the tricky thing about judgment is that it can be done positively or negatively. Whether judgment is good or bad has to do with us. What spirit, what attitude is coming out from. Whether we are humble or we are proud. Whether we are kind or unkind. Whether we are wise or superficial. Criticism tends to be biased and overly negative. And criticism is often done with no love or kindness towards another person. At its worst, it can be bullying and attacking someone's character and identity directly, to the person's face or even through social media. And sometimes people can claim to be giving you constructive criticism, or friends that tell you, "I'm just trying to tell you authentically how I feel." But you know, they are not trying to connect with you in the relationship. They are just trying to pick on you with no love. And other times, it can come in the form of gossip, criticizing someone behind their back. Jesus says, do not do it. Don't be a person with a critical, negative, nitpicking spirit. If you are, stop. And even if we are not that bad, all of us does it at some point. Jesus says, don't. Hard, right? It's okay, I can relate to you. There are a few reasons why human beings tend to criticize. We criticize others to fit in. So in Singapore, it is our way of life to complain and criticize. So instead of speaking our minds constructively, taking actions to make things better, we gossip and complain about whatever and whoever we don't like. And if you're among a group of friends who are constantly critical, before you know it, your group has a negative culture. You don't have anything else to talk about if you are not complaining or criticizing someone. And it just becomes a habit. And sometimes in school, groups like this are the popular kids who bully others who they think they are not as cool as them. And we join in because we want to fit in. And if you're not careful, you can end up becoming as shallow and as mean as they are. Which brings me to another reason why we do this. We criticize others to feel good by comparison. So do you know, human beings, our brains are hardwired to compare. Long ago, it was a primitive means of survival. We needed to see the differences in groups in order to know which groups we belong to for protection. And today, that primitive part of our brains is still secretly in operation. It's why people exclude people by being racist, discriminating against foreigners. And even if we belong to the same group, we always want to be smarter, richer, more good-looking than our friends. You see, criticizing others, seeing only their faults or labeling them as not as good, makes us feel superior. In school, you go, hey, what do you get for your test? Wow, so low, I got 97 leh, you better work harder. Whoa. Or sometimes it's through humble bragging, right? No, oh, how long did you study? Oh, wow, you had to work so hard. And you know, I studied last minute, right? I scored the same marks as you. All right, here's the third reason why we criticize. We criticize others out of what we dislike about ourselves. So in psychology, they call this projection, where we negatively judge someone because we are not happy about some aspect of ourselves. And this can take many forms. For example, criticizing someone for working too hard because we feel bad about being a procrastinator. Carl Jung, a famous Swiss psychologist, thought that this is how we protect our ego. We magnify flaws in others while ignoring our own flaws. This is our mind's way of dealing with our deep insecurity. So guess what? When we criticize another person, it's not so much that the person has a problem. It's actually we have a problem. We are actually having an ego problem, whether it's an inflated ego or a fragile ego. We are the ones who are not happy about some aspects of ourselves. So what's my point? Or rather, what's Jesus' point? Don't go through life and relationships being a proud or insecure critic. All right, so I have three things I want to say today. So number one, being critical is disruptive. So by being critical, you can disconnect someone from their best and truest self. In a 2019 Today article, a Singaporean lady named Angeline, who was a SINDA award recipient, shared her story on growing up being bullied in school because of her weight. In primary 4, she was 75 kg, and it was one of the first few times she was shamed and shunned by her friends about her weight. And out of loneliness, she would end up eating her meals in the school's toilet cubicles because no one wanted to join her during recess. The shame did not let up in secondary school. Although she enjoyed sports, she was frequently relegated to being a substitute for games during PE lessons because no one believed that she could do well for the team. The bullying took a toll on her, and there were days when she would just simply go home and cry. And she said this in the article, "I was very upset and lonely. I felt that people were judging me based on my looks and never beyond my weight." So I thought I'd show you a video of Angeline sharing her story. So let's roll the video in 3, 2, 1.
Definitely people judge based on appearance. It was so hard to fit in. Your self-esteem, when it drops, it makes it more difficult for you to put yourself out there. At 12 years old, I was 75 kg. People would call me like fatty. There wasn't really any control. I would just go to the canteen and buy whatever I wanted. And there were times that I would just get 2 burgers and a drink for myself. I'll go to the toilet cubicle and just sit down and eat there. When I was primary 6, one incident that I recall was one of my classmates actually, before I sat down, he pulled my chair behind. So the most heaviest that I can remember that I saw on the scale was 120 kg. So I think this was a size, I believe it was a size 44. So for some point of time, I only wore 1 jeans. So when I decided to lose weight, I was very fearful of people looking at me and making fun of me. So what I do, I usually go on to YouTube, I find exercise workouts, simple videos, then I will go inside my room, I will just do it. So it was only after 1 year that I said, okay, I picked up the courage to go to the gym and go and do swimming. Those who used to bully me, they no longer speak to me ever since. But it was another surprise as those who never spoke to me throughout these 4 years, they suddenly came up to me and interacted with me. At my lowest, that was my year 1 of poly, I was 65 kg. However, halfway through my poly, I actually lost one of my loved ones. So in order to cope with the grief, what I turned to was food. I will have my downs and my ups, especially if I give in to temptations pretty fast. So my current weight is 80 kg. It's something very discouraging for me because I put in so much effort from 120 to come down to 65. I didn't envision losing weight to be like that, like having a lot of stretch marks, the skin sagging and a lot of excess skin. Right now, I want to focus a bit more on mentally accepting myself. To be very honest, I changed because people made me change. It's not I genuinely want to lead a healthier lifestyle. Because I was scared of bullying, I wanted to feel accepted, that's why I changed. But for people out there, even though they are big and they love who they are, I think that's more important. And in fact, I want to learn from them.
So you see, the effects of criticizing others is that we disconnect them from their best selves. Shame can really damage someone's self-esteem and destroy any chance of them feeling a sense of belonging. The criticism you give without thinking takes just a moment, but the toll that one moment takes can last long after. In her book, I Thought It Was Just Me, Brené Brown defines shame as shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. You see, shame prevents us from showing our real selves to friends around us. It sabotages our efforts to be authentic. How can we be genuine when we are desperately trying to manage and control how others perceive us? How can we be honest with people about our beliefs and at the same time tell them what we think they want to hear? How do we stand up for what we believe in if we are afraid of being rejected? And now ask yourself, do you want to be the person who makes someone else feel that way? You see, by being critical, you not only damage someone else, you will hurt yourself and your relationships. In Matthew 7, verse 1, it says, don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. That critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. Jesus says a critical spirit has a way of boomeranging back on you. You lose friends. And even if you manage to keep friends, they are probably as critical as you. And the truth is, all of you don't like each other. You feel lonely despite being together. But you have no choice because there's no one else to be friends with you. Friends are supposed to build up one another and speak the truth in their lives appropriately. But if a friendship is constantly about criticizing each other for their faults and failures, it is really tiring. Both parties will feel never enough. In Romans 14, verses 10 and 13, it says, so where does that leave you when you criticize a brother? And where does that leave you when you condescend to a sister? I said it leaves you looking pretty silly, or worse. Verse 13, forget about deciding what's right for each other. Here's what you need to be concerned about. That you don't get in the way of someone else, making life more difficult than it already is. Most of us are not super negative and critical people. I hope. But I do think this is what tends to happen. All of us are different people with different personalities, different ways of doing life and processing our feelings. And what happens is human beings, we are so self-absorbed that we don't often take into account that our friends are not us. And so when our friend doesn't respond to something the way we do, we judge them and criticize them. And some of us even think that we are helping the person, but actually we are not. Helping them would be understanding them and helping them in a way that works for them. Criticism is when we expect them to respond the way we would. Now listen, I know this is tricky. Remember, we still need to be people of good judgment, which means sometimes telling the truth of our friends about their character. But what I really want you to ask yourself is, are you being a good judge of character or are you just being a critic? And really, if you can't say it with love, with the other person's interest in mind, instead of you just expressing your own opinion, maybe keep your opinion to yourself. So we say here at The Evolution, nothing good to say, don't say. That's right. Don't be a critical person. Learn to listen and love more than you speak. We all want to be more like Jesus, amen? Well, Jesus was constantly criticized for not being critical enough. Critical people hated him for being what they call a friend of sinners. Listen, it's not that Jesus has no standards. In fact, we know he has very high standards. Standards that even his critics wouldn't live up to. But whatever Jesus' standards are, he always taught them through the lens of listening and loving first. So one day, in John 8, it says, the legal experts and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. Placing her in the center of the group, they say to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone women like this. What do you say?" They said this to test him because they wanted a reason to bring an accusation against him. Jesus bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. They continued to question him, so he stood up and replied, "Whoever hasn't sinned should throw the first stone." Bending down, he wrote on the ground. Those who heard him went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. Finally, only Jesus and the woman were left in the middle of the crowd. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Is there no one to condemn you?" She said, "No one, sir." Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, don't sin anymore." Did Jesus uphold his standards? Yes. But he did it in a non-critical, loving, accepting way. The legal experts, on the other hand, were biased. They just sided with whatever standards they thought, from their perspective, was correct. So they brought the woman caught in the act of adultery, but not the man. They chose to magnify her flaws instead of their own. And when Jesus corrected them, they walked away even without saying sorry. You know, which person in this story do you want to be like? Jesus or the legal experts? Okay, second thing I want to talk about. Correction and being critical are not the same. Just like how Jesus did it, we shouldn't be critical, but it doesn't mean you cannot have honest conversations with each other. Now, I want friends who speak to me lovingly in an encouraging way. Friends that don't make me feel like I'm constantly being scrutinized. But I also want friends who can make me better. And that means I must be able to get constructive feedback and give constructive feedback. Constructive feedback is something we can give well if we are free of a critical spirit. And constructive feedback is something we can receive well if we are humble and open. So I am really thankful for pastors and leaders in my life, that they are constantly thinking about us and how to grow us to become the best selves for God and others. And we have a saying here in EVO when it comes to mentoring: correction is not rejection. So I remember when I was younger, I used to think I was open to correction by my leaders. But I was a yeah but person. So when my leaders corrected me, I would agree, but in my head I would say, Yeah, but they didn't see me do this or that. They have wrongly assessed me. One day my leader sat me down to address this issue in my life and how it affected not only my relationship with people, but also my relationship with God. You see, in that moment, I could choose to feel offended that I'm being criticized and rejected when it's not true. But I decided to trust my leader because I know they genuinely care and love me. Because correction requires connection and love. Criticism does not. So here are some differences between correction and criticism. Correction is other-centered. Criticism is self-centered. So with the scribes and Pharisees, everything came out of a concern for themselves, but not the other person. They weren't really concerned with God's standard. They were concerned about their own self-righteousness, coming off like they were holier than the woman. They also wanted to come off as better than Jesus. And truth is, they were jealous. So they were trying to trap and shame him publicly. The whole situation was about them. They only cared about their own popularity. Second one, correction is empathetic. Criticism lacks empathy. So if you are truly giving correction and not criticism, then it should be given with empathy. The goal here is not just to express your opinion on someone. The goal here is that person's well-being. Which means you should want to really listen and understand where the other person is coming from. You will care whether is it a good time to say something in a way that they can receive it and move forward. You will pause to ask yourself, am I saying this correctly? Or am I being biased and wanting them to respond the way I would? And the next one, correction is said in love. Criticism is not. So the legal experts had no love for the woman. All they wanted to do was to find fault and to look right in front of people. Contrast their actions to another incident where Paul says in Galatians 6:1, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. So if you love someone, your first choice should always to speak with them in the spirit of gentleness, not aggression. To seek to restore them and not tear them down. And the last one, correction restores and reconciles. Criticism harms. So the goal here is always to restore and reconcile. And you do that by winning people over, not hurting them and pushing them away. Friends, in EVO, will you choose to be part of a community where we can be accountable to one another? To let God and leaders speak into our lives and correct us so that we can become the best selves. To be able to trust God and leaders with an open heart and open mind. So the third point I have for you today is how we judge ourselves and others depends on the measures in our heart. So in Matthew 7, verses 2 to 5, I'll read it again. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the splinter that's in your brother's or sister's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your brother or sister, let me take the splinter out of your eye when there's a log in your eye? You deceive yourself. First, take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's or sister's eye. Okay, let's do an unusual experiment with these verses. So right now, I want you to turn to the friend next to you, and we're going to try something together. So look at the person, stare into their lovely faces. Okay, now, whoever you are with, okay, now slowly, I want you to use your dominant hand, and I want you to reach out and slowly try touching your neighbor's eyelid. All right. Okay. Was it easy? Okay, rather easy, right? Easy to aim. Okay, now I want you to cover one of your eyes. And before you try to do it again, I want you to say to your friend, let me take the splinter out of your eye. Now slowly try to do it again. All right. So now, what you have experienced was that the second time round was harder, right? Why? Because all of us need both eyes for depth perception. When we have both eyes open, it's easier to gauge the distance. When we have only one eye, it's a little harder to make sure you don't blind your friend. We never make good judgment if we haven't done some inner work in our lives. To deal with our pride, to deal with our insecurity, to question our motives and feelings, to be aware of our bias and measures. And when we don't do the inner work to be more perceptive than we are expressive, chances are we are going to end up hurting other people and ultimately making a fool of ourselves. Jesus says in Matthew 7, verse 2, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. You can start doing the inner work by knowing what are the measures in your heart. What measures are you using when you dole out judgment about someone else? So I like how Mark Manson, an American self-help author, simply put it as, the way you measure yourself is how you measure others, and how you assume others measure you. So if you measure your life by your family relationships, then you will measure others by the same standard, how close their family is to them. If they are distant from their family or don't interact with them as much, you'll judge them as unfilial, ungrateful, or irresponsible, regardless of their lives or their history. If you measure your life by how much fun and partying you can have, then you will measure others by the same standard. How much fun and partying they have. If they prefer to stay home and binge watch K-dramas, you will judge them as inhibited, scared of the world, lame, soulless, regardless of their personalities or needs. Oh, so everyone can relate to this. Or if you measure your life by how much you've traveled and experienced, then you measure other people by the same standard. How worldly they've become. If they prefer to stay home and enjoy the comforts of routine, then you judge them as incurious, ignorant, unambitious, regardless of what their aspirations really are. And if we believe that we are hard workers and we earn everything we have, then we believe that everyone else earn what they have. And if they earn and they have nothing, it's because they have earned nothing. If we believe we are victimized by society and deserve justice, then we believe that others are victims of society and deserve justice as well. If we believe our value comes from faith in a higher power, then we will view others by their faith or lack of faith in a higher power. If we measure ourselves by our intellect and use of reason, then we will judge others through the same lens. The way we measure ourselves is the way we measure the world around us. So I thought I'd share a personal story with you. So as most of you already knew, my dad suffers from Parkinson's disease, and he had to retire earlier because he was unable to work. And I remember being told that there's a small chance that the disease is hereditary. And I became worried that I would end up being like my dad. Hence, I grew up telling myself that I want to maximize my youth and to experience everything I can in case it happens. I measured my life by the number of new experiences I can have. So, in my poly days, I would jump on every experience that my school, my CCA, or my friends have to offer. I would sign up myself for overseas exchanges and volunteering and take part in all my CCA performances and activities. And I would also hang out with my friends till late night for YOLO suppers and stayovers. I still do now. But because of how I measure my life with new experiences, I will often form judgment of my friends based on that too. If they do not indulge in the experiences as much as I do, I will judge them as like a boring person or being purposeless. I will then distance myself from them and only hang out with people who are fun and exciting. And in some cases, I will even cut loose my friendship with them. But it was only later in life that I realized some of the most important relationships I have are also those who fall below my measure of fun and exciting. Friends, ask yourself, what matrix are you using to measure your life? Could it be your intellect, your exam results, your PSLE, your O and N levels results? Could it be being relevant, owning the latest gadgets, newest iPhone, your PS5? Or could it be your body image, that you must maintain a certain shape and size? You know, a big part of our development is to recognize our own fixation, to recognize how we measure ourselves and consciously choose our metric for ourselves. But another big part of development is to recognize that everyone has their own metric. And that metric is likely not going to be the same as ours. And that's usually fine. Most matrix people choose are fine, even if they are not the same ones you would choose for yourself. And that's simply part of being human, accepting that others measure themselves and the world differently than you do. It is one of the most important steps to consciously choose the right relationships for yourself. It's necessary for developing strong boundaries and deciding who you want to be a part of your life and who you do not. You may not accept a person's ideas or behaviors, but you must accept that you cannot change a person's values for them. Just as we must choose our own measurement by ourselves and for ourselves, they must do it by themselves and for themselves. Hence, what Jesus is really trying to teach us in Matthew 7 is to be mindful about these measures and matrix we have in our lives. And you know, my hope is that everyone here, as individuals in this amazing community, will learn to be less judgmental, to be less critical about others. Instead, practice mindfulness and love towards one another, such that every single person who steps into EVO can feel welcomed and loved. So just to recap, point number 1, being critical is destructive. Point number 2, correction and being critical are not the same. And point number 3, how we judge depends on the measures in the heart.